History remembers queens, martyrs, saints, but not her. She had no title. No chronicle bore her name. Yet she lived. She bled. She waited for someone who never returned. And though no one wrote of her hands, they were the hands that carried fire, fed the sick, held back tears. This is not a story of greatness. It is a story of endurance, of a woman not written in history.
Before the rooster crows, she is already awake, not because she wants to be, but because the thatched roof above her lets in the cold, and the straw beneath her back never forgets to poke and scratch. Her name is Ali's, daughter of no one notable, wife to a man who works the fields, and mother to 2 children who know the taste of hunger better than sweets. She is one of hundreds in this village, and yet, for the most part, she feels like a ghost drifting through the smoke and mud. The Middle Ages were not kind to women like her. Not cruel, not intentionally, but indifferent in a way that leaves marks deeper than any whip. Ali's pulls herself up, careful not to wake the children still curled beneath her woolen shawl. The fire has died in the hearth. Of course it has. There wasn't enough wood to keep it going through the night. She rubs her arms and looks for her clogs, already dreading the icy touch of frozen ground. Outside, the darkness is just beginning to pale. The village is still asleep, but the pigs stir in their pens, and a rooster, impatient, lets out its first ragged call. Ali's breathes in the smoke of the dying embers and steps outside. This is the part no one writes about, the hour before the sun rises. She goes first to the well. Her husband, Thomas, will need water for the oxen, and the children will need something hot in their bellies. The wooden bucket creaks as she lowers it. Her hands, cracked and red, grip the rope tightly. She remembers when they were soft. She also remembers when that mattered. The water splashes back up and wetness clings to her wrists, burning with cold. She doesn't flinch. On her way back, she passes a neighbor's cottage. A woman named Ussold lives there, older, widowed. Ussold used to be beautiful, or so they say. Men would whistle when she walked past. Now they don't look. That's the lifespan of admiration here. Short, brutal, and over before the second child is born. Inside again, Ali stokes the embers and lights what little kindling she has left. The pot over the fire is blackened with age, and the oats inside are fewer than yesterday. But it will do. It must. As she stirs the pot, Thomas stirs too, groaning at the stiffness in his bones. He doesn't speak to her. He hasn't in days, not out of anger, just exhaustion. Words are a luxury for people with time. She gives him the first bowl without a word. He nods, swallows, and disappears into the gray. No kiss, no gratitude. That's not how it works here. The children rise next, rubbing their eyes, and she forces a smile. It's thin like the porridge. After they eat, she begins the real work, cleaning, mending, preparing. She patches a hole in Thomas's tunic and sighs at the state of her own. A tear across the hem has grown teeth. By mid-morning, she is in the field behind the house, tending to a small garden patch. The soil is stiff with frost, but she digs anyway, her hands numb. It's not planting season, but if she clears the weeds now, it'll be easier in spring, if spring comes, if anything grows. Other women begin to appear, shapes moving through mist, carrying baskets, rags, hopes. One calls out a greeting. Ali's responds, but it's automatic. They talk about eggs, hens, the weather, the priest's new sermon. Never feelings. Never the dreams they no longer have. But Ali's has one quiet, stubborn. It visits her some nights when the children are asleep and the stars leak through the thatch. In it she runs, not away but freely. Her feet don't hurt and her breath is her own. No apron, no soot, no one calling her name. She doesn't want riches or silk, just a moment without need. Back inside, she prepares lunch such as it is. Salted turnip, a slice of yesterday's bread, and a whisper of hope. Tomorrow will be the same. But today, before the rooster crowed, she remembered she was still alive. And for now, that is enough. There are sounds Ali knows by heart. The creak of the door when Thomas leaves before dawn. The groan of frozen wood in the roof when the wind shifts. The rhythm of her own breathing in the dark. Too fast when she wakes from nightmares. Too slow when she dreads getting up. But more than all the sounds, it's the silence that weighs on her. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses on the chest, that grows heavier when no one calls her name, not out of anger, but because there is nothing left to say. In a world where survival swallows softness, silence becomes armor. The children are older now, not by much, but enough that they run barefoot in the dirt and return with scraped knees. They ask fewer questions. They've learned already that asking rarely brings answers. Sometimes Ali's catches herself staring at them too long. She sees herself in them, her childhood repeating in smaller, quieter echoes. She remembers her own mother, a woman with thick hands and thinner patience. Ali's used to think she was cruel, but now, with cold water soaking her skirts and a screaming chicken in her arms, she understands. Fatigue doesn't make you violent, it makes you hollow. This morning she must pluck 2 hens. The priest will come through the village soon, and the family is expected to provide. God, after all, must be fed. Feathers cling to her sleeves, and the smell of blood coats her fingers. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't speak, she just works. Thomas returns from the field early. His face is red from the wind, eyes tired. He looks at the children, then at her. But again, no words. He gestures toward the shed, then disappears behind the cottage. Inside the shed is a goat, bleeding and sickly. One of its legs is swollen. Thomas wants her to tend to it. She kneels in the straw and strokes the animal gently. Its eyes are cloudy, and for a moment she feels a pang, something dangerously close to tenderness. "I know," she whispers, surprising herself. It's the first thing she said aloud all day. Later, when the sun is high and the frost has melted into mud, Alize walks to the stream behind the trees. She carries a small bundle of clothes to wash. The water is frigid, the rocks beneath slippery. Still, she kneels, scrubs, rinses. Her fingers go numb. She glances around. The village is out of sight here. Only the wind and the birds share the space, and for a flicker of time she breathes freely. Here, among the trees, she remembers laughter, not recent but real. A festival, maybe 5 years ago, when music played and someone had wine. She danced then, clumsy and laughing, her hair undone, her feet bare in the grass. She was still Alize, but lighter, less buried. Now laughter feels foreign, indulgent. A sharp sound breaks her memory, a twig snapped. She turns. A young boy from the village, maybe 13, lingers at the edge of the woods. His eyes drop when she sees him. He mutters something and hurries off. Was he watching her? Maybe, maybe not. Trust is a luxury she no longer entertains. As she walks back with the wet linen clinging to her arms, she thinks of her body. Not in vanity, not in shame. Just as a tool, one that aches, that bleeds, that feeds, that serves. It is hers, and yet it is. Claimed by work, by children, by a husband who touches her only when the weight of loneliness is too much. She used to wonder what it would feel like to be desired, not out of duty, but from longing. That thought faded long ago, replaced by practicality. Romance belongs to minstrels, not mothers with cracked heels and scabbed knuckles. As night falls, Alize prepares the meal. Turnip soup again, a heel of bread, a pinch of salt if lucky. The children are quiet. Thomas eats without complaint. No one thanks her. When the candles burn low and the wind groans again in the roof, she curls up beside her children and closes her eyes. Sleep is not rest. It is interruption. And in the hush between breaths, the silence returns. It is heavy, but it is hers. Alize awoke before the sun, not because she was ready, but because the cold seeped into her bones as if the night itself whispered that rest was a stolen luxury. The fire had long died. Her hands, curled beneath the straw mat, were stiff with chill. Still, the day did not wait for warmth. She moved quietly, careful not to wake the children or Thomas. It was baking day, one of the few days when the cottage might smell like something other than soot and sweat. The flour was coarse, the yeast nearly dead, and the oven old and sullen. But if she managed it right, she could conjure a loaf that might taste like memory. In the village, bread was more than food. It was currency, offering, survival. A poor woman who could bake passable loaves could trade with the neighbor who had a cabbage, or the old man with salted fish. But if the bread failed, if it burned or sank, there would be no forgiveness, only hunger. She kneaded slowly, the dough sticking to her knuckles, her wrists aching with each push. The rhythm was ancient. Her mother had taught her, just as she was taught by a woman whose name Ali's had never heard. This was the chain they all bore, knowledge passed without ceremony like scars. The fire needed coaxing. Too much fuel and the bread would blacken. Too little and it would be raw. She stoked carefully, whispering more to the wood than to God. As the oven heated, she went outside to fetch more water. The frost had thinned but not disappeared. In the field, Thomas labored with a neighbor digging irrigation trenches. His face was stone. He hadn't touched her in weeks. Not in desire, not in cruelty. He was simply gone. Still breathing, still moving, but gone in a way only men seemed allowed to vanish. Women didn't disappear. They stayed. They remained visible even when invisible. She returned to the cottage and placed the loaf into the oven. As it baked, she sat on the cold bench by the window and allowed herself a moment of stillness. From here, she could see the chapel spire and the priest's house, always warm, always lit. Ali's rarely attended services. She knew what the sermon said. Women must be quiet, obedient, fruitful. Her body had done its part, but her mind, restless and knotted, rebelled silently. The smell of baking rose slowly, and for the first time in days her shoulders relaxed. A knock on the door broke the spell. She opened it to find Usold, the widow, standing there with a frayed basket. She offered 2 eggs in exchange for half the loaf. Ali's hesitated, not because she minded sharing, but because it meant the bread had to be good. Usold smiled, but it was thin and tired. They sat in silence by the fire as the bread cooled. When Ali sliced it, steam curled upward, carrying the scent of warmth and hope. She gave Usold a piece and watched her chew slowly, reverently. "It's better than last week," the widow murmured. Ali's nodded. That was enough. Later, after Usold left, Thomas came in without speaking. He sat at the table, removed his boots, and rubbed his feet. Ali's placed a slice of bread before him. He ate it in 2 bites. No compliment, no comment, just need. That night, as the children slept, Ali sat outside the cottage, her back against the wooden wall. The stars were hidden behind clouds. The moon was low, but the air was filled with the lingering smell of bread. And for a moment she imagined she was somewhere else. Somewhere cleaner, softer, not richer, not grander, but freer. Where a loaf of bread didn't feel like a miracle, and silence wasn't the only language she knew. Rain fell with a quiet insistence, not heavy, not violent, just enough to turn the earth to paste and the air to something that clung. Ali stood barefoot at the threshold of her cottage, eyes scanning the sky. The roof leaked in 3 places now, and the children's feet were growing calloused from damp straw. There were no visitors today, no trade, no priest, no beggar. Even the chickens kept quiet in their shelter, feathers ruffled in complaint. On days like this, The world narrowed to the walls of one's own house and the weather inside it. Thomas had left at dawn to help repair a neighbor's cart. He said nothing before going. He never did any more. Alice watched him walk away into the fog, his silhouette soft, dissolving like a man being remembered more than seen. Inside, the children played with pieces of twine and two hollow bones they had imagined into dolls. They made no sound. Alice did not stop them. Instead, she gathered her shawl and a broken bucket and walked out through the slop toward the back field, where the elder patch grew wild and untended. Elderberries. Bitter, shriveled, barely hanging on, but useful. Boiled down, they could stain cloth, ease fevers, color cheeks. They reminded her of women, overlooked until needed. She knelt in the mud and began plucking them, ignoring the wet that crept into her knees. The sky pressed low and the wind tugged at her hair. She didn't flinch. Each berry dropped into the bucket with a tiny wet sound. One, then another, dozens, hundreds. She worked without thought, only rhythm. And then a memory came. Not a grand one, just a voice. "You must never let your hands rest too long," her grandmother once said. "Idle hands call the devil, busy ones keep hunger away." Alice had believed her then. Now she wasn't sure which was worse, devil or hunger. She returned home soaked through. Her fingers were purple with juice and raw with cold. She placed the bucket near the hearth and sat down, staring at the flames. The children had fallen asleep on the floor, curled like kittens, their feet against each other's bellies. She touched their backs lightly, not to wake them, but to remind herself that they were still warm. That night, after the soup was eaten and the floor swept, Alice did something she had not done in years. She sang, softly, a lullaby without name, without language, just notes she remembered from someone long gone. It wasn't beautiful. Her voice cracked. Her throat was dry, but it was hers. And in the firelight, her children stirred. One opened his eyes, smiled faintly, and fell asleep again. In that moment, Alice felt the mud still clinging to her skin, the taste of elderberries on her tongue, and the echo of her own voice in the air. It was not joy, but it was life. Nightfall came early during those months. The sun, always stingy in winter, slipped behind the hills before the stew had finished boiling. Inside the cottage, shadows gathered in corners and didn't leave. The hearth's flame flickered like a weak pulse. Alice moved quietly, her body knowing the rituals of dusk without needing light. Stir the pot, add water to stretch it, wrap the youngest child in wool too thin for warmth. There were no visitors again, no neighbors passing by, only the occasional bark of a dog or the crows shriek over the black trees. Alice sat down on the floor near the fire, legs tucked beneath her. Her back ached from the day's labor, scrubbing the wool sacks, cleaning the knife, fetching ice instead of water. Still, she did not complain. To whom would she speak? The walls, The silence was no longer silence. It had become a texture, a companion. It hummed in her ears like an old lullaby. But tonight there was something else layered beneath it. A sound too low to be wind. A whisper, faint, like breath sliding across wood. At first she dismissed it. The fire plays tricks, she told herself. So do tired minds. But it came again, this time behind her, soft, too soft to catch words. She turned. No one. The children slept near the far wall. Thomas had not come home. She stood slowly, knees cracking, and walked to the window. The frost outside mirrored her own reflection. Hollow eyes, tangled hair, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Then another sound, not quite a voice, not quite a moan. A vibration behind her ribs. She backed away from the window, grabbed the wooden ladle from the pot, useless as a weapon but solid in her hand, and crept toward the door. She didn't open it. Instead, she listened. Nothing. Only the thump of her own heart. Then something moved outside, not large, not heavy. A scrape like bare feet dragging through frozen dirt. Alice pressed her ear to the wood. The air beyond pulsed with cold. She remembered stories her mother once whispered, of women who died in childbirth wandering the lanes, of lost girls seeking warmth, of the old one who took voices in the dark. But she wasn't a girl anymore, and fear was too expensive. She opened the door. The night was black, no stars, just fog and the memory of shape. At her feet, nothing but mud and twigs. She stepped out. A branch cracked in the distance. She turned quickly, and for a moment she thought she saw it. A figure, slender and hunched, just beyond the woodpile. She didn't chase. She didn't call. Instead, she whispered into the dark, "I see you." And the shape vanished. No reply. No echo, just her own breath in the air. Back inside, the children hadn't stirred. She placed the ladle back, sat down, and stared into the hearth. It was then she remembered. Tonight was the anniversary of her sister's death, 7 winters ago. Blood on snow, a child born too early, a scream swallowed by the wind. No one had spoken of it since, but tonight something had. Alice rose with a heaviness that clung to her like a soaked cloak. The morning brought no clarity about what she'd seen the night before. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps ghost, but in truth it changed nothing. The bread still needed baking. The children still needed feeding, and the silence still needed filling. Outside, the mist had thickened. It curled around the trees and slipped under doors like a secret. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but she refused to let the fear bloom. Fear was a luxury for those who could afford to freeze. Today was mending day. Clothes that had been worn to near transparency needed new life. She laid the torn linen and wool on the bench. Thomas's work tunic, her daughter's smock with one sleeve torn, a cloth once used to swaddle a baby long buried. She took out her needle, a precious object, and the last of the dark thread. Each stitch required patience, and her fingers, swollen from cold and work, struggled to obey. As she sewed, her thoughts drifted. She remembered her wedding day, not a celebration but a transaction. Thomas had not hurt her, but he had not known her either. They were two strangers sharing a house and a future assigned by others. Still, for a while, he had smiled. He had tried. She could no longer recall the last time he had looked her in the eye. Her daughter, Milla, came to sit beside her. The girl watched quietly, then reached to hold the edge of the fabric. Ali's looked at her, brown eyes soft, hair tangled from sleep. "Will I mend clothes too someday?" Milla asked. Ali's paused. "Yes," she said after a beat, "but not like this." Milla tilted her head. "Why not?" Ali's didn't answer. She wanted to say, "Because I want better for you. Because you deserve to mend poems, not tunics." But what use were such dreams? Milla would stitch the same pain into every seam if nothing changed. They sat in silence, mother and daughter, thread and time. In the afternoon, Ali's walked to the edge of the village to check on her cousin, Ira, who had taken ill weeks ago. The house was dark, the door slightly ajar. Ali stepped in, calling gently. No answer. She found Ira lying in bed, her face gray, eyes half open but unfocused. The room smelled of sweat, dampness, and something metallic. There was no fire. Ali's lit what little kindling she could find and spooned water into Ira's cracked lips. The woman barely stirred. Her hands were skeletal. Her voice was gone. Ali sat beside her, whispering stories not to entertain but to anchor her cousin to the world. She spoke of when they were girls and danced barefoot in rain, of stolen apples and broken shoes, of the time they tried to trade a toad for a ribbon. Ira blinked. That was enough. As evening fell, Ali's returned home and found Thomas already there. He said nothing about where he'd gone. He rarely did. She handed him a repaired tunic and he nodded, expression unreadable. That night, Ali stitched one last tear, a hole in her own shawl, and let a single tear fall into the fabric. Not for fear, not for longing, but because she still had thread. The frost deepened. By midwinter, even the trees had grown silent. Their limbs stood still like old women gripping invisible cloaks. The earth no longer softened underfoot but crunched, cracked, and refused to yield. Ali's wrapped her feet in scraps of cloth before sliding them into worn leather. Her boots, once Thomas's, had long since surrendered their shape. Still, they kept the cold from gnawing through too quickly. Each morning she rose before the children and moved about the cottage as if in a ritual. Stoke the fire, check the broth, wrap Milla tighter, breathe, again. The cold made everything slower, thoughts, movements, speech. Even pain froze until it became a hum rather than a scream. But it could not silence memory. Some nights, as the wind howled through cracks in the wall, Ali's would press her body against her children and let herself recall. There was no indulgence in her remembering, just quiet inventory. She remembered the first time she bled, the way her mother slapped her, then hugged her, then warned her. She remembered the birth of her second son, the one who never took a breath. She remembered the harvest festival when she had danced once, only once, and felt the wind lift her hair like it loved her. And she remembered the hunger. It returned now, familiar as an old scar. The winter had run lean. The larder held dried roots and hard bread. Ali's rationed with the precision of a miser. 3 bites for the children, 2 for her, none for Thomas when he didn't return. No one spoke of the hunger. They carried it like shame. And it wasn't just food. There were other hungers, ones that lived in the body, not the belly. Hungers for warmth, for voice, for touch. Hungers that crept into the skin and whispered during sleep. Ali's did not name them, but she felt them. When Thomas returned and lay beside her without a word, she felt the ache of touch without tenderness. When the children clung to her, she wished she could be soft. But she was not soft. She was survival. One morning, the neighbor's boy appeared at the door. His face was red with cold, and he held a pouch of dried beans. "My mother says thank you," he said, eyes avoiding hers. Then quieter, "She says you saved Ira's life." Ali's took the pouch, nodded, and touched his shoulder briefly. He flinched at first, then leaned into her hand. When he left, she turned the beans over in her palm, small, hard, precious. She exhaled slowly and wept, not for the gift, but because someone had seen her. That night she cooked all the beans. The children ate with quiet wonder, unsure if it was real. Thomas mumbled something, perhaps gratitude, and even Milla giggled once. After they slept, Ali stayed awake by the fire. She pressed her fingers to her lips as if trying to remember the last time they had smiled. She couldn't, but she thought she might again. Outside, the wind continued its slow mourning. But inside, something warm had returned. Not joy, not comfort, but something the cold could not take. There were wounds that bled, and there were wounds that whispered. Ali's had known both. One left stains on cloth. The other hollowed out the soul. The morning came gray, cloaked in the kind of stillness that made even the birds cautious. Ali's carried her water bucket to the well, her breath forming ghosts in the air. Every step was careful. The frost beneath her feet could shatter if betrayed. At the well, she met Bruna. Bruna was older by a decade, with lines around her mouth from biting back too many words. They did not smile at each other. Smiling was a language that had fallen out of use. They nodded. Bruna drew the first pail, her arms trembling with effort. As she lowered the second, her sleeve slid back and Ali saw it. A bruise, purple, fresh. Bruna pulled the fabric down quickly, but the damage had already spoken. Ali's didn't ask. Bruna didn't explain. This was how things were done. On the way back, Ali's thought of her own body. the aches that never healed, the places where skin remembered too much. Thomas had not struck her in months, but his silence was a cold hand on her throat, his absence more painful than his presence. That night, while the children slept, Thomas approached her in the dark. No words, just the sound of breathing and weight. Alice did not resist. She did not welcome. She endured. When it was done, she lay still, listening to his breath even out into sleep. Her eyes traced the beams above their bed. One had cracked during the last storm. She wondered idly if it would fall one day. She did not move. She no longer cried afterward. The tears had dried into something else. Salt turned to stone. The next day, Alice went to the woods to gather dry branches. She walked further than usual, into the part of the forest where the trees whispered more than they watched. There, she found a clearing she had not seen before. In the center stood a small stone, flat, moss-covered and warm despite the cold. She sat, and for the first time in many moons she let her body go limp. No children to hold, no pot to stir, no eyes to avoid. She let the silence take her. Minutes passed, or hours. When she stood again, her knees ached, but her chest felt lighter. She carried no wood home, but she carried something else. A memory of stillness, a whisper of her own name spoken by the earth. That night she sang softly to Milla as the girl drifted into sleep. The tune had no name. The words were half forgotten, but it was hers. It was wash day. A cruel day, Alice always thought, when water bit through flesh harder than any man's hand, and steam was a distant luxury only nuns or noblewomen might know. She knelt by the stream with 3 other village women, hands raw, voices muted, movements practiced. Beside her, Bruna dipped a bloodied cloth into the freezing current. It wasn't menstrual blood, too thick, too dark. Alice noticed the wince in Bruna's wrist, the careful way she moved, the downcast gaze that avoided even sympathy. None of them asked. Pain among women was both public and private. Ida, the youngest of the group, barely 16, had only recently joined them in the ritual of washing. Her skin was still soft, her eyes not yet dulled. But today, even she was quiet. Alice broke the silence. "Is it true," she said, "that the baker's wife lost her baby again?" No one looked up, but Bruna muttered, "Third time." Ida shivered. "Why does God take so many?" she asked. The question fell heavy into the running stream. No one answered. Alice thought about her own lost child, a boy who had lived for 7 hours. She had wrapped him in the same cloth she now used to dry Milla's hair, a cloth whose threads had held both blood and milk, grief and warmth, life and its echo. As they scrubbed and wrung and folded, the conversation turned. Quietly, then louder. Stories surfaced of the priest's warnings, of the midwife's herbs, of husbands who drank too much mead and touched too hard. And then laughter. Dry, cracked, almost defiant. Ali's realized they were not just cleaning linen. They were washing their truths. They shared them like bruises, shown not to be pitied but to be witnessed. When the washing was done, they helped one another stand. Bruna offered Ali's a root for the ache in her hands. Ali's gave Ida a bit of wax to coat her bleeding fingers. Sisterhood in their world had no ribbons or rituals. It was built in shared silence, shared suffering, shared water. Later that night, Ali sat by the fire holding the cloth from the stream. It smelled of ash and cold. She pressed it to her face. Thomas was asleep, turned away. Ali's whispered a prayer, not to the Virgin, not to Christ, but to the women of her blood, to her mother and her mother's mother, to Bruna, to Ida, to every woman who had bled in secret, suffered in silence, survived in shadows. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. Thomas did not return that night, nor the next. This was not unusual. Ali's knew the rhythm of absence. It had become part of her seasons, predictable as frost, unwelcome as rot. He vanished sometimes for nights, sometimes for weeks, always returning with fewer words and a new bruise or scent clinging to his skin. The village men made light of it. "He's a man," they would shrug, as if that explained the erasure. But the hearth still needed stoking. The mouth still needed feeding, and the silences still needed braving. Ali's moved through her days with a steadiness mistaken for strength. She patched clothes, crushed grain, traded herbs for barley. She smiled when Milla asked if father would come back. "Soon," she lied gently, brushing the child's tangled hair. But inside, the truth whispered a deeper ache. She was a widow in all but name. The title wife had long since become hollow, like an old shoe, familiar, worn, but unfit for walking. She bore the weight of it, not as devotion, but as duty. A chain that was neither gold nor iron, but invisible, woven into breath. At market, the baker's new apprentice, a boy not much older than Ida, offered her a slice of warm rye. "You always trade fair," he said, eyes meeting hers a moment too long. Ali's took it. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers brushing his. Brief, accidental, dangerous. She walked home slower that day, not because of tiredness, but because her heart had remembered something, the sensation of being seen. That night she dreamt. She stood in a wide field under moonlight, hair loose, dress untied. A man approached, not Thomas, but a figure whose face was warmth itself. He said nothing, just reached out and placed his hand gently at her waist. She woke before they kissed. She touched her lips and felt no shame. In the weeks that followed, Ali's noticed how many women like her lived in shadow. Wives with no husbands. Husbands in body but not in presence. Men gone to war, to taverns, to other beds. Some women wept, others waited. But some began to live quietly outside the script. There was the tanner's sister, who wore only men's tunics and spoke with no softness. There was Bruna, who no longer flinched when her bruises healed and began helping other women boil herbs they did not name. And there was Ali's, who now lit her own fire without waiting. Being alone had not made her lonely. It had made her alert. She began humming again while she worked, just softly, nothing extravagant. One day, while sweeping the doorway, she saw the apprentice pass. He nodded, said nothing, but he blushed. And Ali smiled, not as invitation, but as permission. She had no lover, she had no plans, but she had returned to herself. And sometimes that was enough. The first frost of the season came silently. Ali stepped outside before dawn, her breath white in the air. A stillness blanketed the world, a kind of hush that even the crows seemed to honor. She stood there barefoot for a few long seconds, just to feel it, just to know she could. She had grown bolder in small ways. A piece of wool she traded without asking Thomas. A basket of mushrooms she gathered deep in the woods, in places forbidden by men who feared old stories. A poem whispered to herself while grinding grain, the words ancient and half-remembered from her mother's lips. Freedom, she had learned, did not arrive with horns and banners. It came like frost, quiet, persistent, transforming everything. In the village, whispers had begun. They said Ali's walked too far, that she no longer braided her hair like a wife, that she spoke to the midwife too often and always returned home smiling. She didn't argue. The baker's apprentice still greeted her with shy glances. Once he dropped a cloth so she would pick it up. Their fingers touched again, longer this time. His eyes held hers, searching not for permission, but for understanding. She didn't respond. Not with words, but she didn't pull away. In the evenings, she began to leave the door open a crack. Let the wind carry scents in. Let the night listen to her breath. Milla noticed. "Why is the door open, Mama?" "To let the sky in," Ali said, brushing the girl's hair back. There were still hard days. A neighbor lost her child to fever. A cart broke an old man's leg and no healer came. The church took more tithes. The Lord's soldiers took more geese. Life did not grow softer. It simply moved forward. But Ali's, she had changed. She no longer bowed her head when men raised their voices. She no longer crossed herself at every door. She no longer waited. She started planting garlic near the edge of the forest, where the light lingered longer. She hung bundles of yarrow and wormwood in her kitchen, not for show, but for strength. The village priest stopped by once. "You should be more modest," he told her. She looked at him and replied, "You should be more silent." And he never returned. It wasn't rebellion, it was return. To the woman before the marriage, before the name, before the silence. That night she stood under the moon again, the same field, same wind. But this time no man came in her dreams. Only the moonlight touched her skin. Only the cold kissed her shoulder. And for once she didn't wake with longing. As she woke with peace. It was Bruna who first brought the firewood wrapped in linen, not for heat, but for ritual. In a world where prayers were stolen by priests and laws were forged by men, women found other altars. Ali's watched as Bruna unwrapped the bundle slowly: dried rosemary, pine needles, crushed charcoal. No one called it a spell. That would risk the noose. But they all knew what it was. It was remembering. They gathered in Bruna's hut. Ali's, Ida, the tanner's sister, and one girl whose name no one spoke aloud, too bruised to speak it herself. They brought nothing but breath, wounds, and silence. Bruna lit the herbs. Smoke rose. Not wild, not chaotic, measured. It circled the ceiling once, then descended like a hand upon their heads. No one spoke. Not yet. That was the way of it. Ali's had never felt holy in church. But here, with ash tracing her cheek, with Bruna whispering words not from any Bible but from her grandmother's bones, Ali's felt consecrated. When the silence finally broke, it was Ida who spoke first. Her voice cracked like thawing ice. "My brother came home from war last spring. He does not touch his food, only his sister." No one gasped. No one turned away. They let her speak, because that too was smoke. Ali's closed her eyes and listened. Bruna told the story of her mother's miscarriage in winter, how she bled alone into straw while the priest preached about obedience. The tanner's sister confessed that she only felt safe in tunics because she hated the way men's eyes changed when she wore her mother's apron. Ali's hesitated, then spoke. "I haven't touched my husband in months," she said. "Not with anger, not with love, just nothing." Even that nothing was something. The nameless girl sobbed then, not from pain, but because silence had never let her cry. They did not fix each other. That wasn't the purpose. They bore witness. Each woman left a thread behind, an herb, a tear, a strand of hair into the ashes. A covenant, not of rebellion, but of recognition. Outside, the frost deepened. Soldiers passed through again, collecting meat, hoarding bread. Life did not wait for healing. But inside Bruna's hut, a circle had been formed. Ali's walked home feeling taller, not proud, not sure, but grounded like a tree that had remembered its roots even under snow. That night she did not light the hearth for Thomas. She lit it for herself. Winter closed in fully. The roads were frozen mud and the wind cut like knives across the open fields. Wood grew scarce, bread thinner, and still the church bells rang, calling the faithful to kneel. Ali's no longer went. She spent Sundays at the riverbank instead, breaking the ice with a stone to rinse linen, to think, to listen to a world that had stopped shouting long enough for her to hear her own breath. One morning, she returned home to find Thomas there. He sat at the hearth, half drunk, gnawing stale meat. "You look different," he said, squinting. Ali's did not answer. He was thinner than she remembered, his hands shaking not from cold but from need. He looked at her as if expecting softness or fear. He found neither. Ali's passed by him, set down the basket, and went to gather herbs from the shelf. Not for him, for her daughter's cough, for her own calm. "I'll stay a while," he muttered. She did not nod, she did not ask why, she simply lived. That night he reached for her, out of habit, out of hunger, not love. She stepped back. "I don't belong to you anymore," she said. It was not loud, but it was final. He grunted, rolled over, and slept. For 3 days he lingered. And then, like so many things in Ali's life, he left again. No door slam, no goodbye, just gone. And this time there was no emptiness, only space, space for air, for warmth, for possibility. Ali's lit the hearth herself, humming an old tune. She made nettle broth and mended a broken fence post. She taught Milla how to braid hair in the old way, not the wife's braid, but the healer's. Bruna visited with dried berries. Ida brought fabric to stitch. Even the priest passed by but kept his eyes low. The village still trudged under winter's heel, but inside her cottage there was heat, not from Thomas's firewood, but from Ali's fire. She sat by the window that evening, watching snow fall gently. In her lap was a book, worn and hand-copied, a gift from Bruna. A story not about kings or saints, but about a shepherd girl who tamed wolves by listening. Milla asked, "Is it real?" Ali smiled. "It doesn't have to be, it just has to be true." The night was long, but the silence was warm, because the fire beneath the silence had never gone out. It had only waited for a woman brave enough to breathe it into flame. And Ali's, she was no longer a wife, no longer just a mother, she was a witness, a keeper of songs unsung, a woman whole, unbroken, and finally free.